February 12, 1943. Naval Air Station, Quonset Point, Rhode Island. Late afternoon. The aircraft comes down too fast. Lieutenant James "Pappy" Wallace pulls back on the stick, trying to arrest the sink rate, but the nose pitches up violently. The massive propeller bites the air. The long, gull-shaped wings wobble. For a split second, the deck rushes up at him. Then the landing gear slams down hard. The F4U Corsair bounces once, twice. Wallace shoves the throttle forward instinctively, barely keeping the aircraft from flipping onto its nose. When the Corsair finally lurches to a stop, his hands are shaking inside his gloves. On the edge of the runway, a group of instructors exchange looks. Someone mutters what everyone is thinking. Damn thing's going to kill more of us than the Japanese ever will. In early 1943, the Corsair is not a legend. It is a problem. On paper, the F4U Corsair looks unstoppable. A massive Pratt & Amp Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, 2,000 horsepower packed into the nose. A top speed over 400 miles per hour. 6.50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings. Its inverted gull wing design allows a giant propeller without absurdly long landing gear. It is the most powerful single-engine fighter the U.S. Navy has ever ordered. But power is not the same as control.
The probability remains at 70%
The Corsair's
within the
long
target
nose
zone.
blocks
Understood.
forward visibility.
We proceed as planned.
Its landing gear is stiff and unforgiving.
The
Its torque on
environmental
takeoff
factors
is
rule
violent.
out carrier
On
deployment in
carriers,
this sector.
inexperienced pilots struggle to see the deck, bounce on landing, and lose aircraft over the side. Early Navy reports are blunt. Unsuitable for carrier operations. The verdict spreads quickly. The Corsair is grounded, not because it is weak, but because it is too much airplane. Across the Pacific, Japanese pilots hear about it and dismiss it just as quickly. They have faced American fighters before. Wildcats, Buffaloes, aircraft they can outturn, outclimb, outthink. The Japanese Navy's elite pilots fly the A6M0, a machine built around lightness and agility. It turns tighter than
Corsairs
anything
stationed
in the
here are
sky,
vital for the upcoming
climbs
operation.
effortlessly. In the hands of a veteran, it feels like an extension of the body. American
All set
fighters,
for
by
departure.
contrast, look heavy,
Good. Let's get this
overbuilt,
mission started.
brutal. The Corsair, with its massive engine and thick wings, appears clumsy. A brute. Japanese intelligence reports note its speed, but speed alone does not win dogfights. At least that is what they believe. Back in the United States, the Marine Corps sees the Corsair differently. Marines do not need perfect carrier manners. They need a fighter that can operate from rough island strips, haul firepower, and survive punishment. While the Navy hesitates, Marine squadrons begin flying the Corsair into combat. They learn its quirks the hard way.
Okay,
You do
maintain
not
altitude and
dogfight
watch
in a
the airspeed.
Corsair
See
like
the
a
ADF needle
Zero.
there?
You
Yes,
do not
instructor,
turn
should I adjust
tight.
the heading?
You do
Just a
not
slight
slow
correction,
down.
then look up for
You
the
dive.
runway alignment.
You strike. You climb away on raw power. Pilots discover that once the Corsair is above 20,000 feet, very little can touch it. Its speed lets it choose when to fight and when to leave. Its engine keeps pulling even when others gasp for air. The plane is unforgiving, but honest. It rewards discipline, punishes mistakes. Those who survive the learning curve become dangerous. The first Real test comes over the Solomon Islands. Japanese pilots spot the new American fighter and are unimpressed at first. It looks large, heavy, easy to hit. Then it dives. The Corsair comes down out of the sun like a falling anvil, firing a stream of .50 caliber rounds that tear through wings and fuselages. It does not stay to turn. It does not linger. It is gone before retaliation arrives, already climbing back into altitude where the Zero struggles to follow. Survivors report the same thing again and again. It didn't turn. It didn't slow. It hit us and vanished. What they are encountering is not just a new aircraft, but a new style of fighting. Energy warfare. Speed replaces maneuver. Altitude replaces elegance. Firepower replaces finesse. By mid-1943, Japanese losses begin to climb. Veteran pilots, the irreplaceable core of Japan's naval aviation, start to disappear. They are not being outflown in tight circles. They are being ambushed from above, shredded in seconds, and left with no chance to recover. The Corsair's reputation changes rapidly. American pilots give it a name that sticks: whistling death. The sound of its airflow through the wing roots creates a high-pitched howl in a dive, one that Japanese troops on the ground begin to recognize before the attack arrives. Fear follows sound. Ironically, just as the Corsair proves itself in combat, the Navy quietly fixes what once made it unflyable. Landing techniques improve, gear struts are modified, pilot training evolves. By late 1943, the same aircraft once barred from carriers begins operating safely from their decks. The problem was never the machine. It was the time required to understand it. Japanese pilots had dismissed the Corsair because it violated their expectations of what a fighter should be. They believed agility defined superiority, that turning ability equaled survival, that spirit could overcome mass and power. The Corsair was built on a different philosophy entirely. It was not designed to dance. It was designed to dominate space. And once its pilots learned how to unleash it properly, the balance of the Pacific skies began to tilt, quietly, decisively, and permanently. June 19, 1944, over the Philippine Sea. Midday. The sky is crowded. Dozens of aircraft crisscross at altitude, contrails cutting white scars across the blue. Far below, the ocean is calm, indifferent. Above it, the largest carrier battle in history is unfolding. Lieutenant Robert Hansen, U.S. Marine Corps, tightens his grip on the Corsair's throttle as the radio crackles with warnings. Japanese aircraft are inbound, waves of them, coming to defend their fleet. Hansen pushes the nose down. The Corsair accelerates instantly. The airframe shudders as speed builds. The engine roars, deep and relentless, pulling the fighter into a dive that feels less like flight and more like controlled gravity. Through the gun sight, he sees a Zero climbing, too slow, too late. He fires. 6.50 caliber machine guns unleash a dense wall of lead. The Japanese fighter disintegrates mid-air, pieces spiraling away without flame or drama. Hansen does not pull up to watch. He never does. He climbs back to altitude, already searching for the next target. By 1944, the pattern is unmistakable. The Corsair does not fight the Zero on equal terms. It refuses to. Where Japanese pilots rely on instinct and turning skill, Corsair pilots rely on geometry, timing, and overwhelming energy. They strike from above, break away, reset, and strike again. The Zero cannot catch them, cannot outrun them, cannot absorb their fire. A veteran Japanese pilot writes in his combat notes, "The enemy fighter does not circle with us, comes straight down, kills, and disappears. We cannot respond. This is not a contest of bravery. It is a mismatch of eras." The Corsair's dominance is not limited to dogfights. Its range allows it to escort bombers deep into enemy territory. Its durability lets it absorb punishment and return home. Its firepower makes it devastating in ground attack, strafing airfields, ships, and troop concentrations with impunity. Japanese ground forces begin to recognize the sound before the aircraft appears. The high-pitched whine in a dive, the sudden hammering of gunfire, the brief, violent chaos, then silence. The nickname spreads quickly, whistling death. By the time the U.S. Navy fully embraces the Corsair for carrier operations, the outcome is no longer in doubt. Improved landing procedures and refined training turn the once-feared deck approach into a manageable risk. Squadrons deploy from carriers with confidence. The fighter that was once rejected now forms the backbone of naval air power. Japanese losses accelerate. And unlike the early years of the war, they cannot be replaced. Japan's pre-war pilot training pipeline, long, elite, unforgiving, has collapsed under combat attrition. New pilots arrive with a fraction of the experience of their predecessors. Against the Corsair, experience is everything. In a Zero, a mistake is survivable. In front of a Corsair, it is fatal. American pilots sense the shift immediately. The fear that once defined Pacific air combat fades. Engagements become methodical, planned, controlled. The Corsair gives its pilots something they rarely had before in the Pacific War: choice. They choose when to engage. They choose when to disengage. They choose who lives long enough to fight again. Japanese pilots feel the opposite. They are reacting, always a step behind. By late 1944, the Pacific skies belong to the Allies. Not because the Japanese pilots lack courage, not because their aircraft are suddenly inferior in isolation, but because the Corsair represents a different philosophy of air warfare, one built on industrial power, engine performance, and tactical discipline rather than individual finesse. The Zero was a masterpiece of pre-war design. The Corsair was a weapon of total war. After the war, Japanese pilots interviewed by Allied intelligence speak candidly. Many admit they underestimated the aircraft. Others acknowledge that once the Corsair appeared in numbers, the outcome felt inevitable. One former pilot says simply, "We thought speed was only an advantage. We learned it was everything." The irony is difficult to ignore. The Corsair was not loved at first, not trusted, not wanted. It demanded more from its pilots than most aircraft ever would. Punished hesitation. It exposed inexperience mercilessly. But in return, it offered absolute dominance, if mastered. Japanese pilots dismissed it because it did not fit their understanding of air combat. By the time they realized what it truly was, the opportunity to counter it was already gone. The F4U Corsair did not win the Pacific War alone. But once it ruled the skies, the outcome below became only a matter of time.